this was no boating accident. It wasn't a propeller, it wasn't a coral reef, and it wasn't Jack the Ripper. It was a 45. Hey folks, just an opinion here with you. You know, going back to about at least the time of the Colt Peacemaker, and probably long before that, civilians have always emulated law enforcement and sort of copied their choices for personal defense weapons, especially firearms and especially handguns. And that makes good sense because after all, a law enforcement officer's handgun is his personal defense weapon. Departments that have budget for it have the ability to do exhaustive research and testing on guns. They can stress test them, they can test them to failure, they can do all kinds of ballistic tests and so on. And so they can make really informed decisions. And yes, I know on the cynical side, I know there's politics involved, and I know the people in the purchasing department have their say too. But at the end of the day, I'm betting that the rank and file isn't going to carry a weapon that they don't have some pretty good confidence in. And so today, in this installment of the 45 ACP Slugfest, I'm going to compare two 45 autos that are duty guns currently in use in law enforcement in the United States, both heavily relied on for the personal protection of the brave men and women that carry them and also the people that they protect. I'm talking about the Glock 21 in its various forms, and I'm talking about the 1911, specifically in this case, the Kimber Custom 2 TLE 1911. And you probably already know my philosophy about choices. I don't like to have to make choices. This is my idea of a compromise. So let's talk a little bit about these two guns, do a little shooting, see how they compare. The Kimber Custom TLE 2 1911 and the Glock 21. If you had to randomly stick your hand into a box and pull out one of these guns and it was the one you had to use to defend yourself, I think whichever one you grab is going to work just fine. But obviously, these are very different pistols, different types of designs, different philosophy of use in some cases, different eras altogether. And, some people feel very strongly one way, some people feel very strongly the other way. But let's compare these two pistols because they actually, fundamentally, they have a lot in common in terms of how they're used, how they're employed, and who's using them. So what are some of the key differences? Physically, the biggest difference between these two things is the weight. The Kimber Custom TLE 2 comes in at 38 ounces, unloaded. The Glock 29, just over 29 ounces, unloaded. So you've got about 9 ounces difference between these two pistols. The length, there's a little difference in the length too. The Glock comes in at just about an even 8 inches overall length. The Kimber, 8.7. So you've got just about a half an inch difference. You take away that extended beaver tail on the Kimber, they're very, very, very comparable in length. Height, almost identical. 5.25 for the Kimber, 5.47 for the Glock. So the Glock is a little taller. Okay, now this is what I found to be interesting. When doing my research and looking up these specifications and taking my measurements, I found this one to be the most interesting. When I think of a Glock 21, I think of holding a 2x4, right? When I think of the 1911, I think of something thin and smooth and, just so natural and so on, right? Did you know that the width of the Glock 21 is less than the width of the 1911 by about 1/100 of an inch. So the published width of the Glock 21, 1.27 inches. Published width of the Kimber Custom TLE 2, 1.28. So again, we've got about 1/100 of an inch. That's not a whole lot. It's it's just a tiny fraction, but fairly amazing. Now, one of the things that's really, really going to account for that on a 1911 is going to be your safety. That safety. This one is a relatively wide safety. It sticks out of there pretty well. So that's really going to account for most of the width. Whereas the Glock, pretty streamlined in terms of any external controls, but the whole thing is just pretty wide. All right. So that's a situation where don't let that specification fool you. If you just looked at those two things on paper, you would say, wow, these guns are the exact same width. No. Look at that. Big difference. So again, total width, that's taken into consideration this safety. Whereas on the Glock, we don't have an external safety. And the only external control here, the slide stop, is extremely thin and really doesn't add much, if anything. You can see that the Glock has a slightly longer sight radius. Again, possibly a little counterintuitive to what you might think, but the Glock, slightly longer sight radius. But not by much. Barrel length. The Kimber 1911 is an even 5-inch barrel. The Glock 21, 4.6 inches. So you've got almost a 1/2 inch less barrel length in the Glock 21 than you do for the Kimber. And if we line those up, you can see that there. Capacity. Big advantage, obviously, to the Glock when it comes to capacity. It's a double stack 45 versus a single stack 45. Kimber is 8+1. Glock is 13+1. So again, big advantage there. So the Glock 21 is almost certainly the most issued duty 45 ACP in today's environment. A lot of police organizations carry them. A lot of other organizations that are law enforcement carry them. Many state police agencies in the United States carry them. And yeah, I know some are switching. Some are switching to brands like Sig Sauer, but Glock 21 has still got the lion's share when it comes to 45 ACP. I know a lot of law enforcement officers, this would certainly be their personal preference. When you think of the Glock 21, or when I think of the Glock 21, I think of a time-proven Glock design. I think of durability. I think of reliability. I think of dependability. And I also think of accuracy. The Glock is an extremely accurate gun, and the Glock 21 is among the most accurate of Glocks. So if we think about the Glock 21 in comparison to a 1911, and specifically to the Kimber Custom TLE 2 1911, certainly the Glock is lighter to carry, although you're going to add more capacity of ammunition. That's going to increase the weight a little bit. Not that I don't think anybody really minds that, but it's still not going to bring it up to that full, almost 10 ounces of difference. It's less expensive to produce. Certainly, it's a lot cheaper for Glock to make a Glock 21 than it is for anybody, almost, to make a 1911, unless they're cutting a whole lot of corners, right, or using really cheap material and so on. But certainly when it comes to a Kimber, we're talking about a very high-quality manufactured product. So Glock can make a lot of these things a lot cheaper. What that translates to is a lot more sales, a lot more law enforcement agencies that can afford to arm their personnel with the Glock 21. It's easier to train personnel on a Glock. You've got a lot less controls to operate. You've got a slide stop lever. You've got a magazine release. That's about it. You don't have a decocker. You don't have an external safety. None of that. Relatively easy to maintain and repair. I mean, unless they just flat out break. The Glock 21 is pretty easy for people of even my level of skill to maintain. So all you really need in your department is an armorer or two, and you're in good shape. The 1911, well, it's going to be a little more expensive. What about the Kimber? And again, this particular Kimber is the custom TLE2. This is carried by law enforcement. Specifically, this gun is carried by the LAPD SWAT team. This is their sidearm of choice, exactly the way you see it here. And it was basically spec'd out by LAPD SWAT for Kimber. This gun is an excellently built example of the classic 1911 design. I'm not going to say it's perfection, but it is really, really well made. It's very tight, very accurate, good quality parts, good quality materials, great craftsmanship. This is a nice gun. It's a full-sized 5-inch. It provides accuracy, provides dependability. The 1911 was designed as a 5-inch pistol. When you've got a full 5-inch 1911, you've got the John Browning design. Now, one thing about a 1911, it's harder to maintain. I mean, let's face it, just field stripping and cleaning this gun is a lot more complicated than almost any striker-fired polymer frame pistol. And if you got to fix it, I mean, if anything goes wrong and you need parts replaced, yeah, you're not just looking at necessarily having a departmental armorer. You're looking at needing a gunsmith around. .1911s are notorious for being picky about ammo. Sometimes they're very, very finicky about what they'll eat. Sometimes it requires some extensive testing with different ammunitions to ensure that you've got reliable ammo that you know is going to feed, especially if this is going to be a duty gun. If people are going to, if people are going to trust their lives and the lives of others to this sidearm, you need to make sure that you're using ammo that's going to cycle each and every time. But oh, that classic 1911 feel. Just the comfort of a grip of a 1911, the way it feels in your hand, like you were born holding it. It's not only one of the most iconic looking guns, but it's one of the most iconic feeling handguns. When you pick up a 1911, you can blindfold people, and when they pick up a 1911, they know they're holding a 1911. The 1911 trigger, and especially a well-made 1911 trigger, such as on this Kimber, is very light, very crisp. And one of the trade-offs, though, is mastering that safety. The cocked and locked carry is not for everybody, and it definitely requires a lot of additional training to get proficient. Kimber and LAPD did a great job of speccing out this 1911 to have the important bells and whistles, but not a lot of bells and whistles just for the sake of bells and whistles, right? So you've got a slightly beveled mag well. You've got rubberized grips that are fantastic. I know a lot of folks prefer wood, and I love the look of a good set of wood grips, but boy, these things really, really do grip. 30 lines per inch checkering on the front strap that is absolutely incredible. Mainspring housing, well checkered. I believe that's 30 lines per inch also. Beaver tail safety, nice and big. Gives you great protection. Skeletonized hammer, skeletonized trigger, 3-dot combat night sights, front and rear cocking serrations, so really when it comes down to preferences between the Glock 21 and the Kimber custom TLE2, really comes down to almost a fundamental preference of, are you a 1911 person or do you prefer the modern polymer frame pistol? And most people who actually are carrying the sidearm didn't make the choice. They don't get a choice. If they do get a choice, they get a choice from among a very few options. But if you're able to carry the 1911, then you've chosen something like the Kimber Custom TLE 2. That says that I really care about what I'm carrying. I've given it a lot of thought. I choose carefully, and I choose this. The Glock 21 says, you know what? If I fall down a set of stairs and land in a mud puddle, I want to be able to get up shooting, and I know if I got the Glock 21, I can do exactly that. There we have our Slugfest 2 duty gun comparison. The Kimber Custom TLE 2 1911, extremely well made, very well spec'd 1911. And the Glock 21 Gen 4, proven, reliable, durable. I'm not going to try and say that one of these is better than the other. They're different. They have a lot of things in common. They have one great thing in common, and that is that excellent 45 ACP cartridge. So there you go. If you find yourself in a position to choose between these, choose wisely, or better yet, choose them both.